Episode 5 of Neon Genesis Evangelion involves Shinji visiting Rei Ayanami, the only other Eva pilot we know of at this point in the show. Rei lives in a cold, unhygienic and grey apartment, which conflicts with Misato's more colourful one we've been shown earlier in the series. While Misato's home is warm and full of life, from the colours to Misato's carefree attitude to Pen to the fun banter between her and Ritsuko in an earlier scene of this very episode, this apartment is cold, and this scene is one of only 2 times for the whole show we see other people in Rei's home. Otherwise, with Misato's apartment, it's where Shinji lives and later Asuka. The very minimalist apartment, a bed and the most basic of cooking stations, as well as a single dresser, show Rei is disposable and replaceable, a view that is repeated and expanded upon throughout the show and is a view that is held by several of the show's characters. Not too long after Neon Genesis Evangelion's release, a doll of Rei Ayanami was released covered in bandages, referencing her appearance in episode 1. The doll, quote, sold like wildfire, and now Rei is synonymous with Evangelion's marketing. If anything has Evangelion merchandise, Rei is linked to it in some way. Evangelion merchandising was a key reason the show got to where it is today. Evangelion's marketing was so successful that there is a store dedicated to selling nothing but Evangelion merch in Japan. There were Evangelion sketchbooks, alarm clocks, t-shirts, slippers, and some really ridiculous things. Now, this isn't an extremely rare occurrence. Anime has merch, understandable. People want to show support for a thing they like, and production studios like money, nothing new. But this merch, and actually the current state of the franchise, goes against what Neon Genesis Evangelion is. Now, this video is not at all me railing on the way Evangelion currently is. While I haven't seen the 4th one, the rebuild movies are absolutely phenomenal and I'm thankful of their existence, and after I see the 4th one, I'm definitely going to do a video on them, because wow, they are so good. But I am genuinely fascinated by this weird dynamic between the show that started it all, Neon Genesis Evangelion, the groundbreaking revolutionary show, and the rest of this still brilliant but very different feeling franchise. I'm not saying I want the franchise to change, and I'm not saying that this is bad, even though it's going to appear that way because I'm a shit writer and I can't make good YouTube videos, especially on Evangelion. This is just a topic that I find really interesting and wanted to do a video on. Now, the majority of people watching this video likely already know the story of how Neon Genesis Evangelion was made. It was made by Hideki Anno, and I'm probably butchering that name, who was a successful animator and director. He had worked with industry legends like Hayao Miyazaki, and he had made successful despite nowadays being considered a rather cult classic anime like Gunbuster. Anno eventually took a 4-year break from the industry because of clinical depression. Eventually, Gainax was going under, and Anno was approached by someone from the studio that said they would greenlight anything. That anything was Neon Genesis Evangelion. Anno has been recently finding himself detached from the current otaku culture, so he made something that broke all of the norms, that actively went against the culture of the time. He made the protagonist layered and nuanced, but also rather unlikable at times. He made the story psychological and unappealing to a more general audience. The very design of the Eva units, these mech suits, are skinny and freakish. The way they move is inhuman and unnerving. They're not the appealing, toy brand friendly box mechs of the genre. The story was psychological and very purposely had an unappealing and unique ending, that while being amazing and fantastic, and one of my favourite endings of anything ever, was so different to the things at the time that it caused Anno to receive actual death threats because of how he had ended the series on such a confusing and abstract downer. You can see this counterculture very easily in the OP. It's fast-paced and erratic, and while this is pretty standard for anime action stuff nowadays, this was not normal for the time. Like the show, it was different and out there, but ultimately brilliant and fantastic. So it's really no wonder that Neon Genesis Evangelion, the show that countered otaku culture, became otaku culture. In an interview about the success of the show, Anno said, "I'm surprised Evangelion has become such a hit. All of the characters are so sick." Moe culture is a subculture of otaku dedicated to worshipping and adoring a specific ideal of cuteness, a desire to love and protect specific cute characters in fiction, usually girls, from harm. So is it much of a surprise to anyone that the version of Rei that sold like wildfire was the one where she was wrapped in bandages? Neon Genesis Evangelion achieves a wealth of things. One of them, however, is completely against what the show tries to communicate. In one of the most out there and completely abstract scenes in Evangelion, Anno decides to call out everyone in the audience who watches anime and media as escapism, as a way to avoid doing what you need to do, as a way to avoid responsibility or work. He calls out that you need to go and do your work and live your life. but this Rei figure and a huge rise in moe culture since Evangelion, like he related to Rei, shows how people ignored that message. People who saw the mentally damaged and distraught characters and decided to buy a figure of one of them while they were at their most injured. And the Evangelion franchise has capitalized on that. Rei is just as, if not more, synonymous with the series as Shinji or Asuka or the Eva Unit 1. And the reason why that's a problem, if you ask me, is that Rei is not a great character, or one of the most important characters in Neon Genesis Evangelion. Neon Genesis Evangelion was written episode after episode, with only loose ideas how the series would end being in Anno's mind while he wrote and directed. A consequence of this was that Rei was pushed to the wayside compared to the dynamic of Shinji and Asuka. In the midst of making Eva, I suddenly realised I'd forgotten her very existence. For example, in episode 7, I remembered that I had one shot with Rei. I had no attachment to her at all. I think that was okay, because in episode 8 she didn't appear, not even in a single shot. Episode 6 was too early. At the end, Rei says, "I don't know what to do," and Shinji says, "I think you should smile," and Rei smiles. Afterwards, when I thought about it, I cursed. In short, if she and Shinji completely communicated there, then isn't she over with? At that moment, Rei, for me, was finished. When she smiled, she was already finished, this character. Now, in my personal opinion, I still think Rei's development through the series past episode 6 is brilliant, but the lack of attachment to Rei from Anno past that episode becomes very apparent. She and Shinji never spend any time together without Asuka also being there, and the majority of her future appearances revolve around someone else, notoriously the elevator scene which advances Asuka's character along, but this scene does nothing for Rei's. And a funny thing about the dialogue of this scene.
I thought it was bad when Shinji was nice, but when an emotionless, wind-up doll like you starts being sympathetic, I'm doomed!
Goat Jesus has a character analysis on Rei Ayanami that ultimately was my inspiration for making this video. If you've seen it, you'll probably notice how I've used quotes from interviews, the same as his video, and I mentioned the doll in the episode 5 analogy. In that video, he said that
Anno and the Eva crew owe their success to escapism, in spite of everything about Evangelion being fundamentally anti-escapist.
And honestly, I can't agree more. Rei's character exists as a counter to otaku culture in the show, but outside of it, her character is absolutely assassinated by merchandise and moe. And as much as I love and adore them, the Rebuild movies are not helping this either, although it is very clear that the Rebuild movies are not anti-otaku. In the original characters, escapism was focused on and shown to be a bit of an issue. The characters used their escapism to a point where they were dependent on it. Shinji uses his music as escapism, but he uses it so much that it caused him to avoid certain interactions that if he had had, the events of the show might have turned out differently and a lot better. While Shinji has his music in the Rebuild movies and he does use it, he isn't focused on as much as the escapism side of it and more of what it represents. In the Rebuild movies, the cassette tape was a gift from his father, and it is focused on as that, not as a piece of escapism that gets in the way of interactions, but as a representation of Shinji's relationship with his father. I think the titles of the Rebuild movies, all of them having this "not" in brackets, is a subtle jab at that culture who doesn't look under the surface, who only see you can redo, you can advance, you can use this media to escape from the real world. They see this injured girl wrapped in bandages, but they don't see the broken girl under them.